Hey, this is Gideon, and you are listening to the House Culture Podcast.
House Culture.
Hi everybody, it's time for another House Culture Podcast with me, your host, the managing editor at House Culture, Matt Rouse. We've added a whole bunch of newbies since our last episode, which was filmed especially for YouTube and celebrated 25 years of Faith with Terry Farley, Stuart Patterson and Dave Jarvis. If you haven't watched that Faith special yet, head on over to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/@houseculturenet. And if you have only just discovered us, you've got a brilliant journey ahead of you, getting to grips with all of the stories of the scene, narrated by the legends themselves, like Paul Oakenfold, Steve Lawler, Mr. C, Roger Sanchez, and Fatboy Slim himself, Norman Cook. Outside of YouTube, our main presence is on Instagram at houseculturenet. So if you're not following us there already, come on over to the party and join over 340,000 other ravers and revelers. This is the notice board for everything we do at House Culture. So connect with us there and you will never miss a beat. We are motoring through the episodes in our 5th season now, and in this one we visited the South London home of DJ, artist, label owner, activist and true underground house music connoisseur Gideön. In our chat, he tells us how he first discovered house music and how meaningful he found it.
Pirate radio station, same as most people in London. You know, that music was jumping out the radio and really appealing to me. You know, it was only subsequently that I found out the kind of history of house. As Frankie Knuckles said, house is disco's revenge. You know, that link from the LGBTQI clubs of the US, for me it's sort of central to trying to unpack why it appealed to me on such a deep level.
What a young Gideön was spending his money on whilst at university.
So my first year of university, I couldn't eat and I couldn't afford my rent, but I had a massive fuck off sound system. Wise decisions that you make when you're young. And then in year 2, I bought a coach, which was a 55-seater coach from 1977. So I basically was able to move the sound system around to put on illegal raves, because it was my mission to do queer house music sound systems at the straight, techno, crusty raves and festivals.
How his involvement in the free party movement has led to him to play some unforgettable gigs.
My most memorable DJ gig ever was playing on a sound system at the Criminal Justice Bill demonstration in Trafalgar Square to 50,000 people. I was the first person to play a record on an amplified sound system in Trafalgar Square, and whatever that experience burned into my psyche has remained.
And how the power of dance music can be the fuel for activism.
You know, essentially all that happens is there's a demo. Me and a few of my comrades go, fuck it, let's bring the sound system out. Send a text message to whoever, the Blessed Madonna or Jamie XX. And I'm like, haven't got any money, you might get arrested, there's no hospitality rider, there'll be 2 shit decks, it might be raining and you're going to be moving. Are you up for it? And everyone says yes.
Here we go. This is Gideön.
House Culture.
Okay, I'm sat in a house in South London with a key figure from the world of dance music, someone who can be found behind the decks at some of the most underground clubs in the world, on the streets fighting for our rights to party, or in a muddy field in Somerset orchestrating Glastonbury's first dedicated queer space. It's my pleasure to welcome Gideön to the House Culture Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. We've got a lot to talk about and get through, but before we dig into where you are currently, we always start at the beginning. Can you tell us where you grew up and how you first discovered a love of music?
I grew up not far from here in South London. I guess pirate radio station, same as most people in London, back in the early 90s, was really popping off with some kind of brand new super hot music from the States. And I became obsessed from a pretty early age, and would have my tape to tape cassette recorder permanently poised with a blank tape in it ready to press record if something came on the radio that, you know, I was into. And yeah, really couldn't put my finger exactly on what it was in that kind of US deep house, and as we called it in London, garage, that appealed to me so much. I didn't really know anything about what the music was or where it came from. But I just sensed in it something in it just like appealed to me kind of on a cellular level. And then afterwards, when I kind of found out that, you know, that music was jumping out the radio and really appealing to me on a sort of emotional, spiritual level, as opposed to an intellectual one. You know, it was only subsequently that I found out the kind of history of house, where it came from, who it came from, what it was for, how it was used, and, you know, as Frankie Knuckles said, house is disco's revenge. You know, that link from the LGBTQI clubs of the US, that, you know, it's a tired story and everybody cites the same history and it's a bit of a cliche, but for me it's sort of central to trying to unpack why it appealed to me on such a deep level at age, you know, 12, 13, 14. My first set of decks were at 14, and, you know, prior to that I've been really obsessed with my big brother's best mate, Cesar, who was a DJ, and he really sort of set the tone for me in terms of what he was playing, all the sort of early Strictly Rhythm stuff, and, you know, just the original kind of era-defining sort of US deep house with all of those B-sides, you know, Eddie Perez and Smack Production and all of those, you know, vocal tunes, and you flip them on the other side, and then it's the B-sides, it's the dubs that, you know, contain the magic that my whole sort of obsession with house has been based upon. So I couldn't really understand or articulate what it was about house that jumped off the page for me, but like I say, subsequently figuring out that it was the sort of the descendant of disco and the sort of US sort of disco explosion before it became, you know, mega big business, was made by and for the sorts of dance floors that, you know, I've devoted my life to, and queer spaces and spaces that sort of revere and recognise what black music is, where it's come from, how it's materialised, how it's evolved, and in some senses been co-opted. In other senses, you know, it's organically evolved in a million different directions, and that's great. But it was really Pirate Radio Station that set me off. And then immediately, you know, pirate radio stations were very much like commercial radio today in terms of they were just full of adverts. But those adverts being for raves and parties, almost all of which were illegal, and a lot of which were on the outskirts of London. And that whole kind of house, sort of illegal house music, warehouse party scene also had a sort of counterpart, illegal free party, free festival, and kind of rave parallel that was a lot harder music. And I ended up sort of getting caught up in that ecosystem of the squatters, new age travellers, the sort of sound system, bad boys on the wrong side of the law. Not necessarily the music so much, you know. I'm always have been and always will be a house guy, and those parties were a lot more hardcore, harder, faster, and whiter musically than the stuff that I was into. But it sort of defined me as a person, politically, and sort of set the stage for the rest of my life's journey, which is, you know, I guess you could say is about partnering dance music with political and social causes.
Yeah, absolutely, and we can dig into that as we go through this as well. And just rewinding to that era of when you said you got decks at 14, and so you're already buying records, preparing yourself to get your decks, and so where were you getting those from? Where were you going into central London, into the record shops? Were you humming tunes to people behind the counter or telling them what you'd heard on pirate radio in order to build that collection?
I would go to two places. I would go to Soho, to guys like Goldie at Black Market, or to Terry Francis at Swag in Croydon. Bizarrely enough, Croydon was like a mecca for house music record shops back in the day. So I would take my pocket money, I would take my Sony Walkman with headset and play the tracks to whoever was behind there, and they knew me as Gid the Kid. And after a few years of being a pretty decent, discerning customer, they would then just pull stuff aside for me when I wasn't there, and then every Saturday I would come and the Octave 1 stuff, the Ron Trent stuff, the Chez Damier stuff, all of the classy stuff, which is all still in my record collection now. I've never sold a record. I'm just a collector, but it's not I don't ever let anything go. I've still all got them, but central London, and then Croydon.
And so you had this amazing collection, and you, like you say, you've already got that kind of discerning taste and getting recognised to having that taste. What was the next step for you? Were you just interested in it as, I want to own this music and I'm happy to play it, or were you like, okay, I've got to get myself out there and into parties now? Because you were quite young, so were you even going and experiencing this music in those club rave 100%, environments?
100%. So Heaven, the nightclub under Charing Cross Station, I would go there on a Wednesday night, Thursday night, Friday night and Saturday night when I was too young to get in anywhere else, because me and my best mate Helen had an arrangement with the head of security there. I won't go into what that arrangement
I like the way you've called it, an arrangement.
So we would. I think Wednesdays was called Fruit Machine, and that's people like Luke Howard, who now does Horse Meat Disco. Biggie C, who's one of the Bootylicious crew here in London. Princess Julia, Jeffrey Hinton. Some of the old school kind of soul, two-step soul, and classic sort of US house and disco DJs were all back then playing on a Wednesday night for Fruit Machine. And then Thursday night was Megatripolis, that was also very linked to the sort of countercultural free party scene. So Wednesday was sort of like queer house, straight up house, upstairs, and then kind of more kind of harder stuff downstairs, and super cruisy and super gay and super exciting as a 15-year-old or 16-year-old, whatever it was. Thursdays was Megatripolis. Fridays, I can't remember what it was called. It might have just been called Heaven. And then Saturdays was like the rave, the sort of illegal rave or squat party circuit. So I was very much concentrating on my musical education as opposed to my my national curriculum education. But sometimes I say this to my 86-year-old dad now, which is like, well, I'm actually glad, despite the fact that I maybe wasn't achieving as you might have hoped. Well, I wouldn't actually change anything, because it turns out that being purely very, very much focused on a very, very, very specific cul-de-sac really of house, a little specific kind of niche of house for 35 years now. I know what I'm talking about, and that is able to enable some of the other stuff that I do, and that allows me to pay my rent. So it wasn't all bad.
And and that manifests itself through the journey that you can take people on as a DJ as well. To have that like backing and that musical education, and not wavering from your sound and your passion. What was the inspiration for you when you were at these clubs? Were you looking at the DJs and thinking, that for me is where I want to be behind those decks, commanding a crowd.
I never really looked at DJing as, I want to be famous, I want to be that person, because, forgive me for sounding like a dinosaur, but personality cult of DJ worship was really not a thing then. Certainly not in the world that I was involved in. People were principally there for the music and to hook up with each other.
Yeah.
And the DJs were facilitating that journey. They weren't the thing that you purchased your ticket for entertainment to go and look at that DJ and, be entertained by them. That is a new thing with the advent of social media, basically. So the first thing I wanted to do principally was own the music that was making me feel like it was, and that was the first thing really, to own the music, and then I guess you start to build your own sort of taste, but in a sort of multifaceted way. There's music that you want to listen to when you're feeling blue. There's music that you want to listen to when you're feeling excited, or cleaning the oven, or whatever. And when like so much of my taste musically, like I never really listen to house music at home unless I'm in the studio downstairs making it. I listen to jazz and soul and funk and gospel and blues and reggae and that kind of stuff at home. But back then, I was very excitable, and I was listening to that music at home. And so I think becoming a DJ happened sort of in two capacities. First, I amassed a collection of music that was like credible, and then second, at the time when the criminal justice bill was introduced, and essentially the Tories criminalised a genre of music because of essentially the countercultural groups of people who were playing that music, then the sort of political power of music became amplified, and we all sort of became radicalised and were then sort of forced to look back at the history of the music that we were dancing to, and realise that, from the obvious stories like, the easy ones to identify, like, underground resistance and, all that kind of stuff. Dance music and sound system culture became, was at the pointed leading edge of all of those protests, and I was very much involved in those, and all of my friends were very much involved in those, trying to protect these sacred temporary utopias that we were on pilgrimage to across the country, hitchhiking every weekend to get to these amazing gatherings of incredible underground music that wasn't in the mainstream, with these incredible people who were pulling stuff together for the love of it and for the love of each other, not for the love of the dollar. So in the process of getting swept up in all of that, that was sort of how I became a DJ. One of my most memorable DJ gig ever was playing on a sound system at the Criminal Justice Bill demonstration in Trafalgar Square to 50,000 people. Wow. And I literally put the needle on record. I was the first person to play a record on an amplified sound system in Trafalgar Square during the Criminal Justice Bill demonstrations, when there were hundreds of people in the fountains, it was a sunny day, and it was fucking mental. Excuse the French. And whatever that experience sort of burnt into my psyche has remained.
Can you remember what you played?
Yeah. I played The Fog, been a long time.
Amazing.
But I played, is it called GIDEÖN's Dope Mix? It's the one with the crazy ass, it's like happy hardcore pianos.
Oh, right, yeah.
And, it's got like 16 bars of drums, and then the piano just breaks, and it was literally like absolute insanity, bedlam,
Yeah.
and amazing. It was recorded, actually. There's a cassette tape. There's a cassette tape of it somewhere.
It's out there
in the
somewhere.
universe, yeah.
So you're talking about, it's pairing that the music alongside kind of like a political activism, and obviously, you mentioned the criminal justice bill, and that was really kind of criminalising specifically repetitive beats, wasn't it? And it was almost because the government was afraid of this movement of these young people that have got power together, strength and unity, all coming together, and they were trying to break that. And it just, this whole movement was frightening to the establishment at that moment, wasn't it?
Absolutely, and that's why it's so dangerous to let the thin end of the wedge ever get turned into legislation, because look where we are now, where monstrous scum like Suella Braverman and her Tory cronies, the legislation that is being passed and continues to be attempted to be passed with regards to protest against things like fucking slaughter and genocide in Palestine, sponsored by the UK taxpayers, UK companies. Just stuff that is categorically indefensible. That sort of legislation, those sorts of laws, came about by allowing the criminalisation of protest based on what you're protesting about. So, looking back 30 years, you can see the sort of evolution of this sort of nationalist, populist bullshit rhetoric that the Tories have been peddling. And unfortunately, that it looks like that New Labour are going to continue rolling with.
Well, I mean, we're sat here now. It's late May in 2024, and obviously this is just a couple of days after them calling the election for July the 4th. So we'll see kind of what happens. But the future does look rather bleak in terms of like choices out there for the political establishment. Thinking back to that era of that Criminal Justice Act, and you mentioned the Free Party movement and that kind of scene at that time. What was your involvement in terms of that kind of travelling with them and travelling around and putting on sound systems and rocking up in fields and paint a picture for us as your life involved with that?
Well, it started off with being a sort of the disciple of Spiral Tribe, Bedlam, Total Resistance. Those were three sound system crews of squatters and New Age travellers. But as a counterpart, the stuff that was happening in London that was different culture, different scene, but I was still a disciple of sound systems like Jashaka and IDK Hi-Fi and South London reggae sound systems that were doing, free events in London parks or different dances in different places. And then the queer stuff. So, I was always looking in three directions, sort of crusty, illegal, hardcore, pretty radical sound system culture. The sound system culture from the South London, where I was born, which is essentially Jamaican sound system culture, and then sort of gay nightlife and underground nightlife for queer people. So, obviously those three things are not particularly natural fits for, bedfellows.
Yes, I was going to
normally.
Say.
But, 30 years later in 2024, it's sort of, they can be kind of a lot easier. So I've always managed to hold that holy trinity of sort of sound system culture sort of central. All three of those have always sort of managed to be my axis, musically and aesthetically as well. And so, essentially back in 1990, I can't remember now, 1990 something, when I went to university to study music, I got a student loan in my first year. And I didn't spend it on accommodation or food. I bought a sound system.
Yeah.
I bought a sound system from Babel, who were a sort of sister sound system of DIY, who I think arguably are like the most important house sound system in the history of house in this country, who were a Nottingham-based sound system, and who to this very day have impeccable taste in classic US deep house. Yeah. But they, they were the pioneers. They were the people responsible for getting that sort of sound into the more hardcore kind of traveller, festival, warehouse sort of squat world. So Babel were a kind of sister or cousin of DIY, and they sold me a bunch of their cabinets and amp racks. And so my first year of university, I couldn't eat and I couldn't afford my rent, but I had a massive fuck off sound system. Wise decisions that you make when you're young. And then in year 2, I bought a coach, a 1977 full-size Bedford Dominant Duple, which was a 55-seater coach from 1977. Yeah. And
so that was whilst you were at university?
Whilst I was at university. Yeah. So I basically was able to move the sound system around to put on illegal raves, because it was my mission to do queer house music sound systems at the sort of straight techno crusty raves and festivals. So I got that bus to move the sound system around in, and then ended up moving into the bus. That meant that I needed to live on squatted yards, and those are the people that I was hanging out with were kind of essentially new age travellers. So that was the beginning of the next 2 decades. That was basically living in a vehicle, travelling around with groups of people whose main objective in life was to put on illegal festivals and raves to build these kind of temporary utopias and experiment with modelling sort of community in the shape that we wanted to experience it in and be part of.
Well, it's kind of shaping the what people expect these days from a festival, in terms of, there is that that temporary utopia as you've described it. These people arriving, they all want time off from the world. It was obviously a lot more sanitized these days, I'd imagine, compared to those days, but bringing together the community that you can experience. You can have a reggae sound system over here, you can go and listen to deep house over here, bringing all of that together.
Yeah. I mean, there are some festivals that still manage to do that, and a lot of festivals that don't. And it's just the march of globalized society and sort of capitalism. It is what it is. It is what it is. I can't be bothered to piss and moan about it again. It's like, we all know what it is and see it for what it is, but miraculously there are still some festivals and organisations that exist not principally as a money-making operation, like Glastonbury, for example, which is a family-run festival. That's a horrible thing to say, isn't it? A family-run festival. It sounds like I'm about to start, advocating for family values.
Yeah, people know what you mean when you say that, because the Evis family are almost as big as this festival, and I think like them being the guardians of that. Has maintained that integrity against the kind of march of the modern world. So I need to talk about this coach and this. So you're at university. So where were you parking this coach when you owned it and you were working at university and studying music?
So 5 miles outside of 5 miles away from the university. In a field on a massive New Age traveller site, with 150 vehicles on, a couple of hundred people living on. No electricity, no toilets, literally shit in the woods, collect wood to stick in your wood burning stove to keep warm. the only time you would actually start a generator was to fire up a sound system.
and obviously all your vinyl was being stored within amongst all of that as well. So you were travelling around with all of this.
Yeah. The bus was very, very overweight. If I had have got weighed by I can't remember what they're called, but the sort of department of the police that deals with traffic and vehicles and stuff. I definitely would have had my license revoked. I don't know how many tons of vinyl in the bus, but yeah.
I mean, was it a real kind of cat and mouse game with the establishment and putting on these parties, to kind of take us through like how these things would be organised, or like how would you attract a crowd? Was it all through word of mouth? How was it advertised?
I mean, one of my sort of most nostalgic memories is Spiral Tribe's like rave hotline. It was like a Saturday night rave hotline, and just have these memories of me and my best mate Mel. Literally, there was a phone number, and it was an answering machine, and it would be literally engaged for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours, and you would just on repeat just keep dialing until you got through, and then there was a voicemail saying the meeting point for the rave is at junction 25 of the M25. Be there and look out for a warehouse with a yellow roof or whatever.
Yeah.
And then you had to get to wherever that was, and that could be nationally. It wasn't even London, and you had to get there, and so that sort of dedication sort of meant that only the most devoted people were there. A lot of nutters, obviously, you can imagine. But how would we organise? I think just as on a big sort of traveller site, you find your people, and it's all very kind of tribal and networks of people that sort of hang out with each other, and then those little sort of splinter groups or factions or crews or whatever, sometimes they'll form a sound system or a network or political allegiances. You'll then go and squat a bit of land or a warehouse together, like break in, guard against the police, get your shit together, put up a sound system, put on a rave, and it's all really just word of mouth that would get people there. And that's why sometimes it would take a few days for a party to fill up. But back then we would run for a few days.
And I mean, you say kind of back then, when was that journey from putting on those parties and then obviously it becoming more and more in the public eye, being kind of criminalised, or a movement that the establishment or you should be afraid of, kind of demonised? When did it start to change, do you think? Did you notice any change during those years in that period?
Yeah, I mean, the more it was criminalised, the more heat from the police and the authorities, the more people moved to Europe. So the heyday of the sort of European Technival and festivals were because of the displacement of the travellers from the UK with sound systems doing stuff, and then those that stayed, it was harder and harder to squat, harder and harder to find somewhere to park up, harder and harder to do stuff without getting nicked by the police. The music became harder, the drugs became harder, more deaths, more violence, more stuff. Just it's the same old story with everything in the world, isn't it? Everything just follows that trajectory. And that very much was the case, which led me to a point of going, you know what, fuck you, I don't want to be the only gay in the village. Flag waving for house music, and non-heterosexual Neanderthal bullshit that a lot of the sort of straight techno sound systems were, it was ingrained in that culture, just like really, really, really kind of macho bullshit. And also, I was just forced to admit and accept that the sort of North Star that music was aligned with was sort of industrial, Caucasian, electronic star.
Yeah.
And the music that back then and now I was, following came from the US. It didn't come from that sort of techno world. It came from elsewhere, and it's based on kind of soul and funk were the sort of principal ingredients, as opposed to sort of industrial noise and the sort of geeky, angry shit that was all. I'm not talking about the techno of masters like Robert Hood and people like that, and Jeff Mills. I'm talking about the sort of stuff that was at the core of that scene. Yeah. So I was just like, fuck this, I'm going to move to the States, and then did that. Moved to San Francisco because at the time, I was really interested in sort of West Coast sound in house, and then. That was sort of chapter 2.
Yeah, that West Coast sound as well is very much the way you've just described your sound and what you're interested in, and strictly rhythms East Coast, but all of that kind of like dubbier stuff. The West Coast, that's kind of in terms of house music, has that intrinsic feel to it. So you were over in San Francisco. How did that move happen? Did you have connections through the free party scene that you already had?
Through DIY, yeah. So the Nottingham-based house music sound system, a bunch of them had moved to San Francisco. Some of the crew that I still hang out with now, in fact, the distributor of my record label, Homocentric, was one of those crews that was over there. There was just a lot of people who I respected had relocated to San Francisco. And
it's kind of a countercultural home, hasn't it? It's got that real kind of Haight-Ashbury, very like the hippie movement and all of that. It feels a bit freer in terms of how free you can feel in the US.
And I think I caught the tail end of that, before Silicon Valley, gentrified the living shit out of San Francisco and priced everybody out. Yeah. But the tail end of that, and critically its intersection with gay culture, with queer culture, was like sort of life defining and amazing. And so there's a club called the End Up that's been going since the 1970s. That was I think it's still going. It was actually featured in Tales of the City, the book, and then subsequently the televised version of it. And so every Sunday morning, I think it opens at 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. and it's like sort of soul, deep house, classic San Francisco deep house, but the sort of African American side of that, the black sound of that West Coast San Francisco house, and then with an outdoor terrace as well. And so everybody that had been out all weekend would go there on a Sunday morning, and so that became part of my weekly routine. And then
in terms of visiting or playing as well?
Visiting, visiting. At the time, I was actually mostly buying and playing reggae, Jamaican sort of new roots. Then, because there was so much amazing new stuff coming out of Jamaica, I was having a sort of real sort of love affair with that, as well as buying house at the same time. So that became part of my weekly routine. I was painting and decorating for cash in hand during the week, and then like clockwork, the End Up on a Sunday morning, and then every Tuesday was there's a venue called The Stud that's also been going for a long time, and they had a Tuesday night thing called Tranny Shack that was that sort of language is expired now in 2024, but it was alive and kicking then, and that was like the sort of left field avant-garde sort of performance art meets kind of punk, queer, drag, the sort of best of the best.
What a melting pot!
The best of the best sort of drag stuff in the US, and saw some amazing stuff there. Heard some amazing stuff there, and then also really got a taste for sort of Latin music over there. There's obviously a massive Latin community in Mission in San Francisco, and so it was just like complete immersion in the best music in the world and stuff that feels very, 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 very different than the sort of British Britishness that I had grown so sick of, with the sort of crusty techno traveller, heterosexual, muddy, dreadlocked, skanky kind of underside of dance music in the UK. Yeah. So yeah, it was a baptism of fire, and then really set me off. I mean, I'm now way more East Coast centric. A lot of my friends from San Francisco moved to New York, and I now go back to New York a few times a year, and have done for many years now. Yeah. And it's much more the focus of my kind of US annual pilgrimage. And to be fair, it's always been really the sort of the reference point for me musically, despite going to San Francisco to go for that more sunnier, dreamy sound. I actually prefer it a bit more percussive, a bit more New Jersey, a bit harder, a bit more faggy, a bit more queer, a bit more aggressive, a bit more, keyboard stabby, a bit more Strictly Rhythm, a bit more smack production. So, New York.
Yeah, and New York has had an incredible history throughout, even before kind of house music in inverted commas, in terms of what it's given the community and the scene. During this time as well, obviously you mentioned your studio downstairs. Like, when did you start to create music? You said you studied music as well. Yeah. Were you creating music all the way through this journey as well, or when did it really start in essence?
It started when I went to university to do music, and it was digital music and studio practice. Yeah. So old school music studio business with ridiculous Akai 3000 samplers this big with a tiny little LCD screen where you're scrolling through ridiculous menus to truncate things, and you can only do it for maximum 1 second, or otherwise you melt the internal memory. So for ages, but it's only really been in the last 10 years that I've been able to really find myself in the studio, and it basically coincided with moving out of a fucking truck or a bus, because space is a premium, and it's like, okay, well, either you have a food cupboard or you have a music studio, and here I can have both. And you've got your vinyl behind you. It's not all of my vinyl.
Not
some
all
of
it.
my vinyl.
Some
the
of
rest
your
is
vinyl.
in storage.
Yeah. Okay. And we can talk about the vinyl collection. How do you maintain and manage it? Obviously, it's vast. I'd imagine. Like, having built it up all over those years, you say you haven't sold anything ever. Some people that we've spoken to on the podcast have seen it as like something that kind of weighs them down a bit, and are happy to let loose of batches here and there.
They're traitors.
Well, I mean, that's an interesting point that you've said. It's
lightweights.
Yeah. And
not committed.
Well, but but how do you manage your collection? Obviously, you've talked about all the different genres that you've bought over the years and played and are interested in.
I mean, it's the labelling system, is quite anal.
Yeah.
It's quite uptight. So
you
lots
have
of
to
different
be. You have to be.
sub-genres of Latin music and gospel and soul and reg groove and all of that stuff. I mean, it was just setting it up when I first built those record shelves. I spent a lot of time categorizing everything and putting it in those spots. It doesn't really take very much managing. But now I rip things that don't exist digitally. Well, I've got a friend that helps me do that. So there is a slow sort of rotational process where I search for something online, realise somebody hasn't reissued it yet or done a digital remaster, go, haha, that's a secret weapon that is unshazamable. I'm going to get that out next time I play Panorama or Adonis or or NYC Downlow. So it doesn't take much management. It just keeps growing. I'm not sure what's going to happen when I need more space. Maybe we'll build another
bigger
floor.
storage company, bigger storage room. So those secret weapons that you've just mentioned as well. How are you in terms of kind of, obviously you're sharing your music in terms of playing to an audience, but if you've got some secret ones that are yours, if someone asks you what it is, are you happy to?
I think so. I respect secrecy, competitiveness, and for me that is at the heart of the sort of sound system culture that I came up through. Shaka, the greatest selector that ever lived, 95% of what he plays it's just it's kind of lost in time now. There was a track of his that he played in like 1995 or something that I was at a Shaka dance and he played it, and me as a little white fag went up to the people who were selling food and rum by the decks at the front, and I was like, what's his record? One of them went and asked Shaka, and he reported back what it was. I wrote it down on a piece of paper, and that was 30 years ago now, and I've still not found it. And I asked him when he was in, a couple of years before he died. I asked a bunch of people around him. Nobody knows what this track was. Maybe it was just a single pressing from his studio. Maybe it was, maybe the person got it wrong. Maybe it was Chinese whispers. It was lost in translation. And who knows? But the fact that this, like when I heard this track, I was absolutely slayed by it, devastated, floored. This is the most beautiful thing I've ever heard, and I've never been able to find it. And that chase, that's part of it. And back in the day, people would blank out artists and track names and labels so that they got to protect the value of the music that they were selecting and playing. And that competitiveness breeds excellence, and it strives for people to develop their own sound. Like, when I'm booking DJs for Glastonbury Festival, 250 DJs a year, or I have a position at the Roof Gardens in Kensington where I'm booking annually hundreds of DJs. I'm just not interested in somebody that sounds like a generic DJ. The best DJs in the world, you can hear a mix come on, and you know who it is because it sounds like them. Derek Carter, Prosuma, Brother from My Love Is Underground. These unique selectors that have developed their sound. It's the same with Tamasumo and Lakuti, and same with Robert Hood, same with Jeff Mills. You can hear who's playing by the tracks that they select and how they mix. And for me, that is a good DJ. So I'm all up for that level of sort of aggressive competitiveness when it comes to finding music and playing music. Loads of the stuff that I play out these days are my own productions, my own edits, rips from my collection, because that's the, not to try and be exclusive, but because it just sort of ends up that way. That's the stuff that sounds the best.
Well, and that's it, and it's getting back to, as we've talked about, like the DJ not being this superstar, someone that should just be looked at and adored. It's actually, you're going to see a DJ because they're a very good selector, and you see specific DJs because you know they're going to play potentially specific tracks that will make you lose your mind, that you have no idea what they are, and the expectation is that the track that's coming next, you might not just give us something that's unexpected and exciting, and someone who can. I love hearing a DJ where you're dancing to goodness knows what, and then 3 tracks later it's completely different genre or pace or energy, and then you question your reality, like, how did I get here? But I'm still having a great time.
Very skillfully. OK Williams is amazing at doing that. Yeah, she's a real pro at doing that. Hannah Holland as well. In fact, there's some really amazing DJs as part of the Adonis crew here in London. Yeah, some really amazing people.
Yeah. So I mean, how would you then describe what your sound is? What defines you, if you had to sum that up, if you could?
I think it's like sort of dubbed out classic US deep house, but on steroids, with a sort of cunty queer spin on everything, and it's always quite sleazy, always quite deep, and quite punchy and aggressive.
Yeah. And you mentioned your label as well, Homocentric. Like, in terms of what you're putting out on that label and the lane that it occupies, I don't want to call it a lane, I can't think of a better word, but the space that it occupies, how important is it for you to have that outlet and that label, and what type of artists are you looking to work with?
I mean, the label was originally intended as a broader project, to invite artists that were operating in the same space musically and trying to platform queer artists that were trying to highlight or reference the sort of lineage of the sort of queer identity within house music. Those were the grand ambitions. It's actually ended up just it's eaten so much time and cost so much money. All it does is hemorrhage money, because obviously it's a house music label. That's what happens. That's what you do. It's like running a podcast.
Yeah. It's for the love. It's for the passion.
It's not for making the cash money. So it's actually just become a vehicle for me to put out solo music that I've made, or music featuring collaborations with other people, and I've done quite a few collaborations with other queer artists on the label, and for the time being it will remain that, because I'm just at capacity with all of the things that I'm doing in the world. R3 Sound System, the label, the Roof Gardens in Kensington, Block 9. That's not even my day job. So I'm limited.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned all those things as well, and you obviously work with, the love music, hate racism movement as well. In terms of what, obviously the world is insane at the moment. The past 7-8 years has just been incredibly crazy. How are you equating, that movement and the sound system kind of interventions that you're doing at at the demonstrations that are all happening? Like, how does that work, and what are you trying to bring to those types of things?
I mean, I run a sound system called R3 Sound System, and the 3 R's stand for resist, reject, revolt. And we have done sound system interventions at major London demos. So when Trump came to London, we drove a 45-foot articulated curtain sider into Soho, full of a sound system, blocked off the street, opened the curtains, and then had some of London's best DJs kick it.
I remember seeing the footage from that. It's incredible.
Until we got in a lot of trouble. And then subsequently we've done some big sound system interventions at the Brexit or second referendum demonstrations, and then we did one the other month outside Downing Street, where everyone got arrested and the sound system was impounded, the truck was impounded, the generator was impounded, all the equipment was seized, and that's still an ongoing situation. But basically, because of my little black book, in terms of artists and DJs, that I've, my 3 decades of being a mover and shaker in house music in London, in New York, in San Francisco and Berlin, essentially all that happens is there's a demo, either a Palestine demo or a Stand Up to Racism demo or one of the historical ones. me and a few of my comrades go, fuck it, let's bring the sound system out.
Yeah.
Send a text message to whoever, the Blessed Madonna, or Fred again, or Hot Chip, or Janie XX, or Elvis 1990, or any of the crew who we've historically had on these demos. And I'm like, haven't got any money, you might get arrested, there's no hospitality rider, there'll be 2 shit decks, it might be raining, and you're going to be moving. Are you up for it? And everyone says yes.
That's incredible. When you're playing to those types of environments, how mindful of the type of music and the energy of the music that you're playing to this crowd? Because, people could be quite angry on a demonstration, very passionate, or, people could be there just for the good time. How are you kind of pitching what you're playing? And
everybody does it in a different way. Like, I think it was Luke Solomon, who is, the OG boss man behind UK house music. I think it was Luke Solomon that played Strings of Life at that Trump demo when, it just really went off. And it's just, experience. Yeah. If you know what you're doing, you read the energy and you harness and surf off whatever element of that energy you want to amplify. So, if you want to take that anger and frustration and do something with it, then, you'll drop probably what, literally just before we got shut down and everyone got arrested at the last R3 sound system outside Downing Street, Jam Supernova just went aggy and played some really like Revolution Now, Let's Riot sort of music. Wow. You can do what you want. That's the responsibility and power of being in the driving seat of a sound system. Yeah,
and we've reached the part of the interview now where obviously we're talking about music and tracks. You've given us what we always do is we have our guests submit 5 tracks to us to put into our playlist on Spotify based on different themes. Every single guest has submitted 5 different tracks. You've been kind enough to give me yours ahead of time, so it's always good to get familiar with ones that I might not know. If we talk about the themes, I can tell you which ones you've chosen if you can't remember off the top of your head, and just give us like a little sketch in terms of why that popped in, because I always try to get people not to think too deeply on it, just like whatever first pops into your head. Why did you choose that track for that theme? And the first theme is The Catalyst, a track that originally got you into dance music or whatever. You've chosen Teddy Pendergrass, The More I Get, The More I Want. What's your history with that track and why did it pop into your head?
It just absolutely devastated me when I first heard it. I was just so blown away by it. And, as with all sort of classic disco from that era, the first 1/3 of it, you got to take with a pinch of salt. It's like the slightly ouchy saccharine sort of pop part. And then the second 2/3 is when you're just smacked in the face with the raw ingredients of what house music is. Yeah. And for me, that track, it does it so beautifully. It's kind of like the format that like salsa operates within. You have your first third that is kind of like introducing you to the scope of what's going to happen musically, and then it's the second 2/3 where you basically go deep, and you're allowed to do shameless repetition. That's how so much of that golden age of salsa that I love works, and that's how loads of those sort of disco 12 inches work, and that The More I Get, The More I Want sort of does exactly the same thing, and it just moved me. So fundamentally that there was no sort of penny drop moment where I went like, right now I'm gonna devote the rest of my life to house music. But when asked that question, I think it's a really good example of the kind of track that where you can understand how house music has arrived on this planet, and you can see really, really clearly the road it's come on, and you can do a dot to dot between the DNA in house and the DNA in disco, and put to bed any of the debate about where house music is from, and what it's for and what it means, with examples like that.
Absolutely, yeah. It's so important to not forget that, and to maintain that dialogue in terms of this is where this music came from. Let's not ignore that. Let's embrace it. Okay, so a floor filler, you have chosen Marcus Garvey by yourself.
I know.
Don't roll your eyes, because you won't believe the amount of people that do choose something by themselves. And it's like, for this, did you set out to make something like, right, I'm just going to make a floor filler, I'm going to make a banger, or is it something that you've played and then discovered like, holy shit, this really works?
No, I mean, I made the track, a while ago, maybe 20 years ago. I read a book called The Life and Lessons of Marcus Garvey, which really sort of opened my mind to him and sort of the foundation that he laid for our space that we have now to understand what imperialism and the shocking sort of blood-soaked history of the UK on the world stage is. And Marcus Garvey, I was first sort of made aware of him by Burning Spear, who have, I think, probably like 20 songs either called Marcus Garvey or about Marcus Garvey, and a couple of albums called either Marcus Garvey or Garvey's Ghost or whatever. And they're essentially just amazing pointers to say, this is a really, really important mind. We're going to signpost towards him in our music and revere him, and then that is going to plant the seed, and then you are then going to go and explore him and what that and what he stood for, and that's exactly what happened with Burning Spear and myself. And as with anybody who was around and operating such a long time ago, there's a bunch of problematic elements of what he stood for in his teachings that are basically outdated. But if you get past that, there's some of the sort of ideas that he proposed were the vantage point, the springboard from which people like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X were able to stand on. And I made Marcus Garvey en route to New York, and I was actually staying about 50 metres from Marcus Garvey Boulevard at the time in Brooklyn, which made me think, wow, I'm definitely doing the right thing. And I got so into it when I was working on it, that I was just like, right, I'm just going to go all out on this. No intro, just straight in at 100%. And it sort of represents that feeling of sort of radical activism, where you're just throwing caution to the wind, saying fuck it, let's have it. And the arrangement, the music, the samples, all of it, it's all about that. And if you can engineer that sort of environment on a dance floor, then that's an amazing buzz, and that's an amazing gift, and that's an amazing thing, especially in 2024, in the world that we're currently living in, which is so fucked and so depressing. And it's just a weapon, if you're taking a bunch of people on a musical journey and you're teasing them, getting them to a place where they're receptive, and there's energy that is you might be able to unleash. Marcus Garvey was built for dropping then, and the equivalent of kind of like tipping petrol on something and then chucking a match in and then running.
Yeah. Well, it's a great summation of it. Yeah, that's exactly what it should be. Well, yeah, brilliant summation of that. Okay, let's move through these. A sunsetter. You've chosen Soul Capsule, Lady Science, NYC, Sunrise. Tell us about your experience with that tune.
Bruno Schmidt, who runs a festival in the mountains in Bulgaria called Meadows in the Mountains, booked me. Well, it wasn't him. It was Galen from Sunset Sound System, he's based in San Francisco, and he's been doing free parties, illegal parties, and club nights in San Francisco for probably 30 years. He's an amazing DJ, amazing producer, and somebody that I've invited to come play at Glastonbury before, and we're always swapping music. He's a master, he's really one of the OGs of that West Coast house sound, and he invited me to play. He did a takeover at this festival called Meadows in the Mountains. That's Bruno Schmidt's festival, and essentially if you luck out enough to be asked to play the Sunrise set, you're basically at the peak of a mountain.
Yeah.
And the clouds are below you because you're so high, and as the sun comes up, crazy stuff happens. Crazy stuff happens in the sky to the light, and it's like plugging the sound system into 1,000,000 volts of magic. It's like the environment and how the universe sort of choreographs what sunrise looks like. If you, I was told by everybody, like, prep for a sunrise set because this will be the most spectacular sunrise you've ever seen, and it was exactly that. And the dance floor, there was just a lot of people there that knew their shit and were really, really, really into it, and it freed me up to play a completely different selection. I think I played for 4 hours, and you can get away with so much more when it's sunrise on top of a mountain in the middle of a crazy forest with no houses anywhere, with 1,500 people that really love house music on a very good sound system. And I played that track there, and it did what it should do, which is kind of made everybody overflow with the love of house music, each other, planet Earth, all of those things that at its best, house does that, doesn't it? And our daily lives, scrolling through Instagram, looking at Gaza genocide and getting punted adverts for fuck knows what, to escape that and fall back in love with our fellow human beings is like, it's the greatest gift, and that track is the perfect soundtrack, if deployed at the right time, to encourage people to fall in love with each other instead of hate each other.
Yeah, and it's great you got that advice to prep for it. Excellent. Okay, a tearjerker. You've chosen Tears by Frankie Knuckles.
I played that last Tuesday night at the Jamie XX's thing. I just love it. It's cheesy as hell, and it's just a timeless classic.
It is,
and the instrumental as well is like, I usually play the instrumental first and then the vocal at the end, so it's like a 15-minute odyssey. Just it does what it says on the tin.
Beautiful. Okay, last tune. It's the end of the night, crowd are asking for one more. You've chosen Kings of Tomorrow, I'm So Grateful, the Angel Rice smooth mix. Tell us about that.
I mean, I think Sandy Rivera, KOT, Kings of Tomorrow, who incidentally is headlining in NYC Downlow this year on Saturday night.
Amazing.
Who I've been trying to get for a long time,
Yeah.
and I've finally got, which is extremely exciting. For me, without wanting to sound like a dinosaur, some of his productions remain some of the greatest house music that's ever made. KOT, back in the golden age of that sort of New York house explosion, where just so much wild, incredible stuff was happening. And his music is so saturated with where it came from.
Yeah.
That sort of New Jersey and Spanish Harlem melting pot of African American music and culture, Latin music and culture, and the legacy of the decades of disco that come beforehand. And he's a master, and loads of his early stuff is just sort of undiscovered.
Yeah.
Loads of it doesn't exist digitally, which is also as we know, a bonus for me. And yeah, there's just something about where it sits, which is sort of straddling kind of Christian Baptist church gospel and sleazy underground queer New York. What better place is there to be in the world than there?
Well, and what better combination? That's an incredible connection to make. And and like you say, people think Kings of Tomorrow that it's finally, and that's like, that's where they start. That's where Sandy started. It's like, actually, you do your research and your digging and pay your due diligence to it. It's actually,
and buy the records as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Because some of those B-sides and some of those remixes that haven't seen light of day, they're just genius.
Yeah,
just genius.
Yeah, cool. And so this is the end of the interview. So I've got one final question. So this is the House Culture podcast. I mean, we talked before the mics came on. As House Culture, we're very much interested in not just the music. It's about personalities, art, fashion, all the things that go around this wonderful movement that we're a part of. When someone says the term kind of house culture, or the culture of the scene that we're all involved with, how do you sum that up? What are the main tenets of it for you?
I mean, the reason why I make multiple trips a year to New York is because the real unmasked culture of house music exists in that city, and should be a reference point for the rest of the world, and Coachella and Tomorrowland, and the massive corporate rape and pillage of house. If you take the time to see what house means in its natural habitat, then you can see it in all of its beauty. The tens of thousands of generic crap that is uploaded onto Spotify or Beatport daily. There's just so much noise out there, and there's so much the sort of spirit and of house has been diluted to such an extent, and the narrative has been hijacked, and it is cultural appropriation, and it is not okay, and it is wildly monetizing something without ever taking the time to pay your dues and to acknowledge what you're doing. And it's completely fine to make music in your bedroom and put it out and do your thing, and that's all good, but I just think that a lot of the originators and pioneers of house, they're fucking pissed off. Because they have been sidestepped. They're not on any lineups. They're not getting any decent record deals. They're not even getting any remuneration for any of the music that they put out. Originally, they've been shafted, and it's sort of bullshit. And I think if you are going to put yourself in a position where you are a steward of house. House is a cultural phenomenon. It's an energy. It's a feeling. It's a thing, which doesn't belong to anybody. It can't be owned by anybody. It can't be co-opted by anybody. But if you are going to be a temporary steward of it, then your stewardship needs to be responsible. And you, frankly, I think, look ignorant unless you really kind of recognise and acknowledge what it means socially, culturally, and politically.
Yeah. Thank you very much for taking part.
My pleasure.
House culture.
He's right, we need to platform the voices and stories that recognise where this scene originally came from. So a big thanks to GIDEÖN for taking part in the show and for making sure that the real origins of house music are not lost on us or our audience. As you heard in our chat, GIDEÖN is one of the brains behind the Block 9 area at Glastonbury. And if you want to know more about that particular festival, dig out our Glastonbury special that was released back in June 2021. As this is a conversation with Malcolm Haynes, the man widely credited as the person who first brought dance music to Worthy Farm. If camping's not your thing and you would rather tune into the beats at home, we have got you covered with the House Culture Perfect playlist on Spotify. You can find the link for this in the episode description. You heard GIDEÖN's choices for our perfect playlist, and these now sit alongside those of all of our previous podcast guests. However, if you head over to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/@houseculturenet, you can not only treat yourself to all of our previous guests' individual playlists, you can enjoy our mixed series of bespoke beats, as well as special video episodes of this show. Please make sure you like, follow and subscribe where appropriate, and don't be afraid to drop us a comment or message on your preferred platform, as you might just hear your name called as a shout out on a future episode. So a big hi to Jay Shabo, who after watching our Faith special with Terry Farley and the rest of the crew, told us on Instagram that the episode was absolute quality and an interesting listen, and that he also can't wait for his kids to be old enough to pick him up from the club as well. Hang in there, James. It'll happen before you know it. Thanks for the love and keep enjoying the show. Before we wrap this up, do the good stuff for us by loving, liking, subscribing and sharing. Tell your friends, spread the word, and most importantly, keep listening and watching. Follow us at House Culture Net on Instagram, and to stay up to date with all things HC, keep your eyes on the hashtag #TrueHouseCulture. And if you ever need to get hold of me personally, you can find me on Instagram at DJ Matt Rouse. Thanks for listening, rave safe, and see you next time.
House culture.